like to please come to order. As you were here, you know that there has been substantial public interest in smart meters, and for that reason, the Allen Park City Council is having the two presentations come before you tonight. And they are presentations, and the only questions that will come to either of the speakers or groups will come from the mayor and council. The mayor and council are not expressing an opinion on smart meters by their presence here today. The format will be that Mr. David Sheldon will speak for 1/2 hour against the use of smart meters. 15 minutes after his presentation is complete, DTE Energy will present its reasons for smart meters. DTE Energy has said that they are having some scheduling problems, and that's why we had to switch the presentations here. And for those of you who add all those numbers together, realize a council meeting, if both people speak for 1/2 hour with 15 minutes, 6 p.m. can't be the council meeting. But if DTE for any reason is unavailable, we will go forward with the council meeting at 6 p.m. Otherwise, we will commence the council meeting 15 minutes after the last presentation. I want to remind you to treat all our speakers respectfully and refrain from audience outbursts. Otherwise, I shall have to ask you to leave. The presentations are being videotaped for archival purposes only. And with that, I'd like to ask Mr. Shelton to come forward and begin his presentation.
Thank you, Your Honor. I am pleased to have the opportunity to address the council this evening.
Mr. Sheldon, can I have you get that? Yeah, if you can get that in front of you, it'll help. The recording.
How's that sound? That about right? Okay.
Great.
I'm pleased to address council this evening, and I'm going to try to hold my presentation to between 15 and 20 minutes so that we might have 10 minutes or so at the end for questions from council.
Okay, thank you.
First of all, let me just say a word about who we are. I am David Sheldon, as you said, and I founded an organization known as Michigan Stop Smart Meters. This was something we did 3 years ago, back in 2011, and we have been fighting this issue ever since. We have held public meetings in various cities around the state, and we have teamed up with others. There's another organization called Smart Meter Education Network out of Ann Arbor, headed by Linda Kurtz, and she and I work pretty closely together. Sometimes we do public meetings together. And I wanted to just say a word about, you know, what kind of people we are and what we aren't. First of all, we aren't anti-technology. We are not Luddites. We are not people that are opposed to technology in general. We are not anti-business. I myself, I'm retired now, but my entire career was in the business world, and most of it in high-tech areas. I spent the last 20 years before my retirement as a computer programmer and software developer, and I hold a master's degree in business. So, and I think it'd be fair to say that most of the people that have associated with me are not anti-technology or anti-business. Okay, so with that, let me get started. This is just a little overview of what I plan to cover today. Am I talking loud enough for everyone? Okay. Just a little overview, and then I want to speak briefly of the role of the Michigan Public Service Commission and how they play into all this. And then we'll talk a little bit about illness caused by radio frequencies. We'll talk about illness caused by what we call dirty electricity. An engineer would probably call it power quality problem. The privacy issue. I'll say a word about DTE's new opt-out plan, and conclude with, you know, what can local governments do? Is there a role for city governments and county governments in this issue? I'm going to start with a short list of just a brief overview. What are the complaints? What are the beefs with these things? The first one is our contention that it does invade the privacy of the utility customer. And I will amplify that a little more later. The next one is it leaves open the possibility that private data that has been gathered without customer consent will be sold to third parties. This is already going on in California. Next is that for a minority of the population, and we don't know exactly the proportion, but we know it's at least 3% and possibly as much as 8 or 10%. For this minority of utility customers, they will become ill almost immediately after a smart meter is installed on their home. And it's not their imagination, because we know of quite a number of cases where people did not even know that a smart meter has been installed, but they know when they first got ill, and they later put it together with the date of installation of the meter. Another problem is that smart meters have been known in some cases to interfere with medical devices in the home. In one case, I think it was out from Massachusetts, somebody's heart pacemaker was stopped by smart meter radiation, and they nearly lost their life because of it. There is evidence that smart meters will likely cause an increase in cancer and neurological illnesses for the majority of the population 20 to 30 years down the road. So at this point, I would say my favorite analogy is what I call the canary in the mine analogy. We know that in the old days of coal mining, I'm sure they have newer methods now, but in the old days, the coal miners worried a lot about buildup of methane gas in the mine because it could asphyxiate them and it could lead to an explosion. And unfortunately, human beings cannot smell methane gas or see it. So it's a silent, a hidden killer. So what they would do is they'd bring a canary into the mine with them every morning. The canaries were really sensitive to the methane gas, and if they saw the canary getting sick, they get out of the mine real fast. And I would make the analogy here that, okay, maybe it's a small portion of the population that immediately gets sick. 3%, 5%, 8%, whatever. Some people would say, well, that's tough, you know. In order for the majority to have the convenience of being able to closely monitor the energy usage and perhaps conserve energy, maybe we need to ignore this small minority that's got an issue. Well, what I'm suggesting, and there's a lot of research that's in peer-reviewed journals that would support this, that minority that immediately gets sick may be like the canary in the mine. It should be a warning signal to all of us that in 20 or 30 years we might all get sick. And of course, it's not just the radiation from smart meters. That's just one more thing layered on top of cell phone radiation, you know, Wi-Fi, all the rest of it. We live with so many devices today that put out radio frequency. Smart meters just adds another layer. Maybe it's the straw that breaks the camel's back. Plus, it's on 24/7, 365. You can't turn it off. You're exposed to it while you sleep. Okay, so isn't the Michigan Public Service Commission the proper forum for our complaints? I'm sure that's a thought that has occurred to some of you. And the answer to that is it should be the proper forum. When the legislature created the MPSC, it gave it a very broad charter to regulate not only the prices or rates that we pay for electricity, but also the terms and conditions of service. It's all in the charter. But the MPSC in recent years has taken the position that the type of meter being offered electric customers, that is, quote unquote, a management decision, and they bow out. When utility customers complained to MPSC 3 years ago, they were told, and this is a direct quote, quote, "We do not interfere with the utilities' business practices," unquote. One might well ask, then, what is your purpose? Because that is what they were created for, was to interfere with the utilities' business practices, because the legislature recognized the monopoly power where we have only one electric provider that could arbitrarily dictate policies. So they were created to regulate business practices, but they aren't doing it. The MPSC is on record as stating that DTE and Consumers Energy, quote, need no permission from us, unquote, to implement smart meters. Okay, so what do smart meters do? Well, very briefly, they collect far more data about our electrical usage than the traditional analog or electromechanical meter that we're all familiar with. They relay this information in real time to the utility by radio signals. They are also planned to act as gateways for communication by the electric utility to and from individual appliances within our homes. That is, once the home is installed, the next generation of appliances that will contain smart chips. And that will come. Whirlpool Corporation announced a couple of years ago that beginning this year, 2014, they will make no appliance that is not a smart appliance. So pretty soon there'll be no choice. As you replace your appliances, you will wind up with a house full of smart appliances that will be talking to your smart meter, which in turn will relay all of that detail to the utility company. So my question, is all this data collection really necessary? We would say no. It reveals information to the utility and possibly others, third parties, about the lifestyles of utility customers and heretofore private activities within their homes. So let's examine some of the arguments that the utility makes and see if they really need all this data collection. Why do they say they need it? To encourage customers to conserve energy and to shift some of their energy demand to off-peak times of day. Okay, if that could be accomplished, it's an important thing, because whether they need to build new power plants depends on the peak load. If they can shift some of that consumption to off-peak, maybe they don't have to build a new power plant, and maybe that's good for the environment. So that would be their argument. Conservation of electricity is to be encouraged by providing customers the ability to see their energy usage by the hour through an internet display or in real time on a home monitor. But do smart meters really conserve energy? And we say the answer to that is no. And we say that because there have been a number of studies done. Pilot studies were done by DTE, by Consumers Energy, and by many of the other utility companies around the United States. No pilot study to date has shown real evidence that customers changed their behavior because a smart meter was installed, or that they changed their behavior enough to make a real difference, like more than 1%. Well, why else do they say they need to collect all this data? Well, they want to eliminate the cost of meter readers. That's understandable. That's a labor savings. But there are systems in use by other utilities called, quote, AMR systems, which automatically transmit monthly reads to a drive-by vehicle, but they do it only once a month, and they don't have most of the problems that we associate with smart meters. Are smart meters necessary to promptly report power outages? That's a favorite argument. Utilities say they want to be alerted to power outages so they can restore power more quickly after a storm. They can dispatch service personnel more quickly to pinpointed locations. But smart meters are not necessary to do this. All I need is a radio a device that sends out a radio signal. It's battery powered. It doesn't have to be on every home either. It could be one for each block that sends them a signal when there's an outage on that block. Here I'm just briefly touching on what is the pattern of emissions. In that diagram, we're looking down on a smart meter that's attached to the outside of a home. And the reason I show this is because a lot of people think or believe or been told that the radiation, the radio waves from the smart meter project in a directional way out from the house and that they don't go back into the house. Well, that's just not so. That red circle up there indicates, the diameter of it indicates the intensity of radiation. And you see that it's going in all directions except for a very little notch at the bottom. Straight out the back of the meter, there's a little area where no radio waves propagate, but that's only 15 degrees to either side of center. Once you get outside that 15 degrees, the radiation is almost as strong as it is out the front. Okay, what are some traits of the smart meters? Well, they communicate with the utility using wireless radio frequency radiation, or RFR. And that's in the microwave range. It's basically almost the same frequency that's used in your microwave ovens. It's, in the case of DTE, it's approximately 902 megahertz. They don't use continuous waves, they use pulsed waves, and I'm going to show a diagram of that in a moment. Each brief transmission reaches high intensity peaks. The peaks are usually averaged over 30 minutes when they take readings, so that tends to hide the peak energy level. This is what it's like. Gosh, I wish I had a pointer. Well, let me try to do this without walking up to the screen. You see a series of those red spikes. Those are the energy peaks. And we know that in the case of DTE, these spikes come off the meter about once every 15 seconds. I personally measured them on my neighbor's smart meter. And I get a big energy spike, 15 seconds of complete silence, then another spike, and so on, every 15 seconds. Well, when the utility sends somebody out to check the energy levels, they'll use a meter that averages that stuff. And because of all those silent periods in between, the average power density is pretty low. That horizontal blue line near the bottom is the average power density. Now, it turns out that the effects, the biological effects on humans and other living things, is determined by that peak power level, not by the average. Each pulse could be something like 50 milliseconds long, but it can have a 1 watt peak pulse intensity, which is many times higher than what the FCC says is legal. And it is but the FCC standards are based on heating human skin, and it's the average power that would cause heating. But the peak intensity causes the biological effects. What do pulsed microwaves do? They're a lot more damaging to living things than the type of radiation that we've known for many, many decades, you know, like radio broadcasting, TV broadcasting. That's all more or less continuous radio waves, not pulsed. This is pulsed. And what that does is it breaches the protective blood-brain barrier. It affects neurotransmitters. It affects testosterone levels, can decrease sperm production, affects the natural rhythm of the brain, can affect heart rate and heart rate variability. Now, you don't just have to take my word for all that stuff. We have the scientific research to back up everything I just said. My group's website is michiganstopsmartmeters.com, and I would encourage anyone who has an interest in pursuing this or getting the backup data to visit our website. There's a lot of the original research there. There are links to the original research. In particular, there's a paper by Dr. Andrew Goldsworthy from Great Britain. There's the Bioinitiative Report, which was a collaborative done by many scientists. The Greek research on mouse brains, the work of physicist Daniel Hirsch, and the extensively researched article by Diane Wilkins. Those are some of the better articles. There are lots of others. So why do utilities falsely claim that smart meters are safe? Well, they say it meets the FCC guidelines. That's usually the first claim. Then they say, well, it's less exposure than you would get from a cell phone or other common devices. You're comfortable with those, right? So why shouldn't you be comfortable with a smart meter? And they say, and it's only transmitting 1 to 2% of the time, so shouldn't be a problem, right? Well, first of all, the FCC guidelines are obsolete. They were drafted 30 years ago to protect a 6-foot, 200-pound male from the thermal effect, that is heating of his skin, in an industrial situation, acute exposure in an industrial situation. They only tested over 30-minute intervals, and the protection is only from one exposure from one device, not from cumulative exposure from many devices, and it's for a single exposure, not 24/7. The FCC guidelines provide no protection from non-thermal biological effects, no protection from pulse signals, peak energy, or cumulative exposure from all sources. I see I better speed it up a little bit, and we're going to run out of time. It uses pretty much the same frequency as a cell phone. But researcher Daniel Hirsch, a nuclear physicist in California, did an extensive study on that he published that shows the total body exposure from a smart meter is 100 times greater than from a cell phone. The World Health Organization in May of 2012 issued a report classifying the radiation from cell phones and smart meters as a possible carcinogen. And they, in 2001, had issued a report classifying extra low frequencies as a possible carcinogen. There's effects on the body's melatonin. It's a natural hormone. All our bodies make it. It's very helpful to preserve quality of sleep and to do many other things. I'm going to bounce through these guys. We think that's not so.